All right, so let's dive into this, Hank. We have a lot to cover. We prepared quite a presentation today, and I know that probably the place for us to really start is let's talk about this verdict. Now, there's a lot of hot takes on the verdict, but I thought maybe we would take just a little bit more time than a tweet on X or a Facebook post to unpack this a little bit. So let's start with, tell us, like, what actually happened with this verdict recently?
So the gist of the case was a class action brought by some plaintiffs in Missouri that was formulated as a response to the MLS's, NAR and the MLS's clear cooperation policy. That was the main thing that they had an issue with. What they really want is to separate compensation, and they want buyers to have to pay their buyer's agents and sellers pay their listing agents at the end of the day. So the effect of the clear cooperation policy, the plaintiffs argued successfully, at least to this jury, was that it was a price fixing conspiracy. And so there was a verdict that came down against NAR, KW, and Berkshire Hathaway.
Interesting. So the more I've been thinking about this, the more I'm wondering, like, is this really going to have the impact that we maybe initially thought? I mean, at the heart of it, it sounds like, right, that in this particular case, they said these parties are colluding to elevate commissions, and we need to separate out the buyer agent commission and the listing commission, that it's unfair or not good business practices, or insert your own legal term here, to quote unquote require or force the seller to pay the buyer broker commission, and that somehow elevates commissions overall unfairly. But as I look about around the country, we've been doing this for a long time, that buyer agent commissions have been negotiable for a good while. I mean, I remember one of the very first deals that I did in like the mid 2000s, when we were really getting into the practice of getting a buyer representation agreement in place. And the agreement we said was, look, our commission is X. We might get Y as a credit from the seller, but you're still on the hook for X. And so often the buyer showed up for a little bit of dollars there in the closing. So maybe that was a little bit ahead of our time, but what's your take? Is this kind of maybe a bit of a nothing burger that isn't going to have the big impact that we initially thought?
It's not a 100% nothing burger. It's not, however, by the same token, it's not a Chicken Little sky is falling that some of you may have seen on some social media. And you're correct. You're 100% correct. Forever on the cooperating compensation, we've been able to put in $1 as a listing agent. And therefore, if the buyer's agent wanted to get paid, they would have to find another source. So that's not new. I do know that there are 12 states out there that require exclusive buyer broker agreements in some form or format, but there are 38 states and some territories that don't. I do think so a couple of things. Number one, the states that don't require buyer broker agreements, those agents will have to immediately become familiar with the buyer broker agreements in those states, and I'd highly recommend that they get signed. In addition, you're probably going to see compensation removed entirely as a field in the MLS just to reduce liability, because the clear cooperation policy will probably have an injunction entered against NAR and or the MLSs even having the clear cooperation policy. We don't know yet exactly what the judge is going to come down with on an injunction, but it's extremely likely.
Yeah.
So the buyer's agents are going to have to get buyer broker agreements signed. And so the question is, where do we go from here? The buyer's agents are going to have to, because there's going to be no co-broke that's mentioned in the MLS anymore. It's probably going to be gone as a field. They're going to have to contact the listing agent in advance of the first showing for their client on every single property. Find out if a co-broke is offered, and if so, how much. And if one is offered, then great. See how much it is, if it's okay with you. If there's nothing offered, and then your buyer can't afford a commission, you have to decide whether or not you're even going to show that property. So,
yes, I think so. What I'm hearing, bottom line, is that for agents who do not have it as part of their daily practice to get buyer agency agreements signed up front, And we're not talking right before you sign a contract. We're talking about upfront before you do some work. You're going to have to tighten that up, right? And that certainly varies a little bit state by state, region by region, but across the country, we're going to have to tighten up buyer broker agreements. Yep. And we're going to have to tighten up conversations about compensation on the buyer side. We've already had to get good at that on the listing side, but now we got to get just as good at it on the buyer side. And Hank, do you think, like, if we do those two things, like check, we're good? Like, who knows where this is going to go legally? It's going to be appealed for years, whatever. But regardless, frankly, those sound like great business practices we should be taking on anyway.
I agree. And part of it is because we were very sloppy previously in how we even told people we were getting paid. Before, if I put 3 agents in a room, one would say, well, the buyer pays us because they fund the whole purchase based on the monies that they put into the kitty. And another agent would say, well, the seller pays us because if I look at line 702 on the closing statement, that has my commission in it. And yet a third agent would say, well, it's neither the buyer nor the seller, it's the listing agent, because in their listing agreement, the seller pays the listing brokerage, and then the brokerage pays me. Yeah. So if I asked 3 different agents on any given day, 3 of them would respond as to 3 different sources that they got paid from. So from that respect, it's nobody's fault but our own.
Let's take it another direction and slice out another thing for another couple minutes, and then we'll go into some additional statistics I actually see in chat. Cheryl actually made a comment like, what are you guys doing here? And let me just publish here off to the side a little bit of information about Alchemy if you're not already a member. So we do bookkeeping and taxes exclusively for real estate agents. So you can see on the side there, when you get a chance, I'll leave this up for a minute, just hit the green button and you can book a free consult with us, and we can see what we can do to help you with your bookkeeping, taxes, or with your business planning overall. All right, so let's go back. JP Montalban, good to see you, JP, in chat. He made an interesting point, which is, what happens if an MLS actually leaves NAR? And, we'll see where all this goes, but a lot of this is at the heart of what NAR's practices are as it relates to the MLS. So if an MLS leaves NAR and just does whatever they want to do, is the clear cooperation ruling even affecting that? Or,
well, it was NAR's requirement that clear cooperation, that the facets of clear cooperation exist. That was the problem. So if clear cooperation isn't mandated by NAR, but all of the facets of the clear cooperation policy are still contained in the MLS, in my opinion, it still might present a problem.
Unless, I guess, they redo the MLS cooperation agreements. Interesting. Right. Well, I think bottom line, what we're saying is there's a lot of directions this could take legally in the coming months and potentially years, though the die, I would say, and I think, Hank, you're saying this is cast in that the skill level for a buyer agent has just gone up.
Agreed.
And we have to be better at getting agreements in place. And we also have to be a lot better about talking about our compensation on the buyer side. Correct. So I think that's an important component. And David Badiz mentions, let's also remember that the clear cooperation is different from compensation policy. The verdict is about compensation policy. That actually is a really good point, David. There's a lot of little nuances in here. Go ahead, Hank.
Yeah, well, clear cooperation had an effect on how the agents got paid and what was allowed to be advertised or what was required to be advertised to be paid. So there are separate policies, but the effect of them at the end are the same. The jury doesn't strike that nuance. So it is what it is.
Yeah, I put this in a bucket of a variety of changes our industry is going through. I mean, personally, I think it's going to elevate the cost for home buying, which is already pretty high. And I don't see how that's necessarily a good thing. But at a business level, I do personally think it's a good thing to elevate the skill set of a buyer agent so that we have more and more professional folks in the business. We'll certainly see, I think, some people rotate out of the business as a result of that. But I think ultimately that's probably going to be a pretty good thing, too, for those of us that are still in this and are doing it full time and are really working to elevate the professionalism in the business. So anyway, we can spend a whole hour on this. We're not going to. We have other economic news that we want to cover and make sure we have a chance to